Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back to yet another live stream of the Reading Epic Threads show, August 31st, 2021, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. You are joining me for a very special edition of this live stream. Because of the length of it, this is going to be the entire show, so I wanted everybody to know in advance, please settle in. It's going to be a wild one because today, my friends, without further ado, I would very much like to share with you issue 10 of Patel Patriot's Devolution. Hold for processing. Want to make sure I got the right one. Okay. Let's try this one more time. You know what? Before I actually get started, let's let some people filter in for a second. So, hello, Juliet. Hello, Joe Pappas. Lori Cava. How are you? How's Enzo the Baker is here. Spirit Fox is here. Laura Kaiser is here. Jose Alberto Janao, how are you, sir? Haven't seen you before. Patel Patriot is here as well. Bad Mofo 505. Chris Ranney is here. Matthew Trump. Michelle 6424. Doomchick 73. DW Bearden. Oh, Devolve already is here. How are you? Deus Rojo. Nyarduk. Let's see here. One Alchar 2. PJ's 14. D Cree. Cherie H. Oh, Joe Woodwell. Okay, so I think the crowd is kind of jumping in. Those of you who are watching me on YouTube, I didn't really want to promote that. This is more of a test to see if their algorithms are still ban happy. So this was just purely a test. So those of you who are on Facebook, who are watching me on, for those of you who are watching me on YouTube, no, don't bother with the pressing whatever. I don't care. It doesn't matter. I'm just testing out YouTube right now. My main home is Twitch and Odyssey, of course. So I'm going to make sure to open up Odyssey and say hello to anybody who may be watching me there as well. So we shouldn't get started right off the bat. If there's only like 25 of you, everybody needs to be here to see the beginning. So I will quickly allow everybody to jump in. So we'll give it a quick start at maybe 8:10 or something like that. So right now we are, holy crap. All right. Odyssey says we have 236, which means that we're probably, oh, holy shit. Okay. Everybody's here. So I'm going to go ahead and I don't know how many are on YouTube. So, okay. 437 of you are on Twitch. So that's much appreciated. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we've got plenty of people here already. So this is the Silent War, the Precipice. And for Epic Jill's purposes, and by the way, guys, before I even get started, I need to just remind everybody, Jillian Reese Art. That's where the main recording of this is going to be on Odyssey. Jillian Reese Art, Jillian Reese, like Reese's Pieces, Art. That's the channel on Odyssey that you need to be following. It's going to be if it's not in the description for every one of these videos, I'm going to obviously remedy that situation ASAP. But without further ado, Patel Patriots Devolution, Part 10, The Precipice. We begin. I need to warn you that this is far and away my longest article to date. I feel like there are parts of this article in which I easily could have elaborated further, but for brevity's sake, I did not. I could have broken this article up into 2 or even 3 parts, but I truly felt it was important to make this one article because it all ties together. By the end of this article, I believe you will understand exactly why the situation in Afghanistan is unfolding the way it is, what role Trump has in it, and that we are truly on the precipice of taking back our country. Almost 10 days ago, I was asked a question by Dave Hayes, the praying medic. Dave asks, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts, whenever you have a few moments, on what might be the earliest date at which America and China began the silent war. Here's a summary of my reply. At the latest, I would say it was January 15th, 2020. In Devolution Part 1, I referenced Trump and Chinese economic dealings. They signed the trade deal on January 15th, the day before his first impeachment started. Here is a screenshot from Devolution Part 1. If you look objectively at Trump's handling of China, his policies were pro-American rather than pro-China approach of previous administrations. In August of 2017, he directed the Office of the United States Trade Representative to investigate Chinese economic practices. Their subsequent report attacked many aspects of China's monetary policy. Trump began imposing tariffs on Chinese products, referencing, quote, a trade deficit of $500 billion a year with intellectual property theft of another $300 billion. I'll cover this IP theft in a future post. These tariffs led to a trade war that culminated in the Phase 1 trade deal signing on January 15th of 2020. Why is that date important? Because the very next day, Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate began. End quote from Devolution Part 1. Part 10 continues. I think the timing of COVID-19 coming from China at the same time as Trump signed the Phase 1 trade deal is too much of a coincidence. I believe COVID-19 was the Chinese Communist Party's response to hurt our economy in retaliation for winning the trade deal, which we certainly did by looking at any objective measure. It must have embarrassed Xi. Dave then pointed out that January 15th, 2020 was the day that the first case of COVID-19 arrived in the United States from Wuhan, according to the CDC. Press release for immediate release Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention today confirmed the first case of 2019 novel coronavirus, 2019 nCoV, in the United States in the state of Washington. The patient recently returned from Wuhan, China, where an outbreak of pneumonia caused by this novel coronavirus has been ongoing since December 2019. While originally thought to be spreading from animal to person, there are growing indications that limited person-to-person spread is happening. It's unclear how easily this virus is spreading between people. The patient from Washington with confirmed 2019 nCoV infection returned to the United States from Wuhan on January 15th, 2020. The patient sought care at a medical facility in the state of Washington, where the patient was treated for the illness. Based on the patient's travel history and symptoms, healthcare professionals suspected this new coronavirus. A clinical specimen was collected and sent to CDC overnight, where laboratory testing yesterday confirmed the diagnosis via CDC's real-time reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction test. That's RRT-PCR test. The piece continues, Devolution Part 10. The number of coincidences that I have come across writing this series has been astounding. Anyway, Dave's question got me thinking about the bigger picture. Trump was making moves to prepare for an election theft long before January 15th, 2020. I can't imagine he knew back in 2018 that in 2 years, COVID-19 would leak from a CCP bioweapons lab and be used as a pretext to steal the 2020 election. This war is bigger than just China. As I said in Devolution Addendum Series Part 1, Trump is fighting a war against the entire political establishment. Remember, the political establishment is the cause of not just America's problems, but problems around the entire world. Many of our government leaders and government institutions have been corrupted nearly beyond repair. They have been selling America out for personal gain for years. They do it because it's extremely lucrative, and they do it because they've gotten away with it for so long. They thought they were invincible. The mainstream media and big tech act as the propaganda arm and spin the narrative necessary for the political establishment to operate while keeping America ignorant. The political establishment then uses the intelligence agencies to do their dirty work. They rig the elections as to never lose their grip on power. The media, big tech, and the intelligence community cover up the rigged elections, then they rinse, wash, and repeat. America's enemies jump at the chance to assist them in their operations. For example, when the CCP has the opportunity to make a shady deal with a corrupt American politician or a member of his or her family, it becomes the best case scenario for the CCP. Having proof of corrupt dealings provides the CCP with the opportunity to control those government officials who are involved. They can use the proof of the dealings as blackmail, and that is an effective tool for getting what you want. It doesn't take long to destroy the greatest nation on earth when its leaders have sold it out. When corruption like this perverts our entire government, who can stop it? The answer to this question is the basis for this article and really the basis for the entire Devolution series. There is only one remaining group of individuals who stand in the way of the total destruction of America. That group is the United States military. Joint Publication 1 from the Joint Chiefs of Staff Doctrine series tells us the purpose of the United States Armed Forces. 2. Purpose. A. The U.S. Armed Forces fulfill unique and crucial roles, defending the U.S. against all adversaries while serving the nation as a bulwark and the guarantor of its security and independence. The U.S. Armed Forces function within the American system of civil-military relations and serve under the civilian control of the President, the Commander-in-Chief. The U.S. Armed Forces embody the highest values and standards of American society and the profession of arms, end quote. Defending the U.S. against all adversaries while serving the nation as a bulwark and the guarantor of its security and independence. What if those adversaries are our own leadership? What if our elected officials themselves are risking the security and independence of the United States? The U.S. Armed Forces have the best intelligence capabilities in the world. What would happen if they received intelligence that a sitting president and/or his administration did something that by any objective measure put the national security of the United States of America at risk? What if it happened repeatedly? How could they defeat the biggest threat to America if that threat is where their orders are coming from? This is where I believe the true silent war began. Prior to Trump ever announcing his candidacy for president, the military was witnessing the highest levels of our government selling out America for personal gain and putting our national security at risk. So, in order to properly provide context to why devolution had to happen, we need to look back at what got us here. Why did the political establishment fight Trump's presidency so hard, as if their lives depended on it? Why were they so desperate to stop Trump that they overplayed their hands and blatantly stole an election? Where did the silent war begin? The Obama years. I have no doubt that the war against the political establishment has been happening since prior to Barack's presidency, but this seemed like the most logical place to start. By the time Donald Trump announced his run for the presidency in June of 2015, the political establishment had already completely corrupted our federal government. Trump built his 2016 campaign on the premise of giving the government back to the American people. From Trump's campaign, quote, Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt, now when I say corrupt, I'm talking about totally corrupt, political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people. This is nothing. There is nothing the political establishment will not do, no lie they won't tell to hold their prestige and power at your expense. And that's what's been happening. I'm doing this for the people and for the movement, and we will take back this country for you, and we will make America great again. The corrupt establishment knows that we are a great threat to their criminal enterprise. They know that if we win, their power is gone, and it's returned to you, the people. The dark clouds hanging over our government can be lifted and replaced with a bright future, but it all depends on whether we let the corrupt media decide our future or whether we let the American people decide our future. Back to Patel. Although the propaganda arm of the political establishment would like you to think otherwise, Barack Obama was a terrible president, and his presidency was filled with scandals. This Wikipedia page, link in the article, has a list of 68, quote, Obama administration controversies. I won't be mentioning every controversy, but I will focus on the ones that I believe are most relevant to the devolution we are currently seeing play out. The primary scandals are Uranium One deal, Operation Fast and Furious, the Clinton email scandal, the Iran nuclear deal, Benghazi, and Spygate. Each one of these scandals is an example of our own government, led by President Obama, directly putting the national security of the United States at risk. I could easily write an article dedicated to each of these individually. With how long this article is going to end up being, I will not be able to do that. The scandal I will deep dive into is Benghazi. You'll see why shortly. I don't want the fact that I won't be providing in-depth analysis of the other scandals to take away from their overall importance. They all play a part in the bigger picture. I urge you to do your own research if you feel something is lacking. Disclaimer. I didn't start following politics until 2018. I had surface-level understanding of these scandals, but I wasn't paying attention as they were unfolding. Writing this article opened my eyes to how corrupt Washington had become. It's truly breathtaking. The Uranium One deal is the typical pay-for-play scenario. This October 2017 National Review article provides a solid breakdown. There's plenty more to the full story, so read the article someday when you have the chance. Quote from National Review 2017. Let's put the Uranium One scandal in perspective. The cool $500,000 the Putin regime funneled to Bill Clinton was 5 times the amount it spent on those Facebook ads, the ones the media Democrat complex ludicrously suggests swung the 2016 presidential election at Donald Trump. The Facebook ad buy, which started in June 2015, before Donald Trump entered the race, was more left-wing agitprop, ads pushing hysteria on racism, immigration, guns, etc., than electioneering. The Clintons' own longtime political strategist, Mark Penn, estimates that just $6,500 went to actual electioneering. You read that right. $6,500. By contrast, the staggering $500,000 payday from a Kremlin-tied Russian bank for a single speech was part of a multi-million-dollar influence peddling scheme to enrich the former president and his wife, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. At the time, Russia was plotting, successfully, to secure U.S. government approval for its acquisition of Uranium One, and with it, tens of billions of dollars in U.S. uranium reserves. Here's the kicker. The Uranium One scandal is not only or even principally a Clinton scandal. It is an Obama administration scandal. The Clintons were just doing what the Clintons do, cashing in on their public service. The Obama administration, with Secretary Clinton at the forefront, but hardly alone, was knowingly compromising American national security interests. The administration greenlighted the transfer of control over 1/5 of American uranium mining capacity to Russia, a hostile regime, and specifically to Russia's state-controlled nuclear energy conglomerate, Rosatom. Worse, at the time the administration approved the transfer, it knew that Rosatom's American subsidiary was engaged in a lucrative racketeering enterprise that had already committed felony extortion, fraud, and money laundering offenses. The Obama administration also knew that congressional Republicans were trying to stop the transfer. Consequently, the Justice Department concealed what it knew. DOJ allowed the racketeering enterprise to continue compromising the American uranium industry rather than commencing a prosecution that would have scotched the transfer. Prosecutors waited 4 years before quietly pleading the case out for a song in violation of Justice Department charging guidelines. Meanwhile, the administration stonewalled Congress, reportedly threatening an informant who wanted to go public. There is no doubt that this extraordinarily gainful ingratiation took place. I outlined some of it a year ago in suggesting that the Justice Department should be investigating the Clinton Foundation and its exploitation of Hillary Clinton's influence as Secretary of State as a potential racketeering case. In 2005, former President Clinton helped his Canadian billionaire friend and benefactor Frank Giustra obtain coveted uranium mining rights from Kazakhstan's dictator. The Kazakh deal enabled Giustra's company, Eurasia Energy, to merge into Uranium One, a South African company, a $3.5 billion windfall. Giustra and his partners thereafter contributed tens of millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation. Besides the valuable Kazakh reserves, Uranium One also controlled about a fifth of the uranium stock in the United States. Alas, Putin, the neighborhood bully, also wanted the Kazakh uranium. He leaned on Kazakhstan's dictator, who promptly arrested the official responsible for selling the uranium mining rights to Giustra's company. This put Uranium One's stake in jeopardy of being seized by the Kazakh government. As Uranium One's stock plunged, its panicked executives turned to the State Department, where their friend Hillary Clinton was now in charge. State sprung into action, convening emergency meetings with the Kazakh regime. A few days later, it was announced that the crisis was resolved. Translation: the shakedown was complete. Russia's energy giant, Rosatom, would purchase 17% of Uranium One, and the Kazakh threat would disappear, and with it, the threat to the value of the Clinton donors' holdings. For Putin, though, that was just a start. He didn't want a minority stake in Uranium One. He wanted control of the uranium. For that, Rosatom would need a controlling interest in Uranium One. That would be a tall order, not because of the Kazakh mining rights, but because acquisition of Uranium One's American reserves required U.S. government approval. Uranium is foundational to nuclear power and thus to American national security. As the New York Times explained in a report on the disturbing interplay between the Clinton Foundation and the transfer of American uranium assets to Russia, the United States gets a fifth of its electrical power from nuclear energy, but only produces a fifth of the uranium it needs. Consequently, a foreign entity would not be able to acquire rights to American uranium without the approval of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. CFIUS, C-F-I-U-S, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, is composed of the leaders of 14 U.S. government agencies involved in national security and commerce. In 2010, these included not only Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who had cultivated a reputation as a hawk opposed to such foreign purchases, but Attorney General Eric Holder, whose Justice Department and its lead agency, the FBI, were conducting the investigation of Rosatom's ongoing U.S. racketeering, extortion, and money laundering scheme. In March 2010, to push the Obama reset agenda, Secretary Clinton traveled to Russia, where she met with Putin and Dmitry Medvedev, who was then keeping the president's chair warm for Putin. Soon after, it emerged that Renaissance Capital, a regime-tied Russian bank, had offered Bill Clinton $500,000 to make a single speech, far more than the former president's usual haul and what would become one of his biggest paydays ever. Renaissance was an aggressive promoter of Rosatom. The Clinton speech took place in Moscow in June. The exorbitant speech fee, it is worth noting, is a pittance compared to the $145 million Newsweek reports was donated to the Clinton Foundation by sources linked to the Uranium One deal. The month before the speech, The Hill reports, Bill Clinton told his wife's State Department that he wanted to meet while in Russia with Arkady Dvorkovich, who, in addition to being a top Medvedev aide, was also a key Rosatom board member. It is not known whether the State Department gave clearance for the meeting. The question appears to have become moot since the former U.S. president met directly with Putin and Medvedev. You'll be comforted, I'm sure, to learn that aides to the Clintons, those pillars of integrity, assure us that the topics of Rosatom and Uranium One never came up. End quote. Patel continues. If you think that is the only Clinton scandal, Lewinsky nothing yet. Forgive my poor attempt at a humorous Monica Lewinsky reference, but please keep the above scandal in mind. This type of pay-for-play scheme is common for our corrupt political establishment. There is no doubt that the Uranium One deal put the national security of the United States at risk. Many details of the scandal have come to light. Our military is obviously aware of those details, and with their intelligence capabilities, they likely know more than we do regarding the details that haven't yet come to light. The real question is, how would white hats in the military feel about seeing this unfold? Would they be okay with this? Operation Fast and Furious. Although the following is from CNN, I believe it contains a good basic overview of the scandal. Quote from CNN. Here's a look at Operation Fast and Furious. From 2009 to 2011, the Phoenix Field Division of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, along with other partners, allowed illegal gun sales in order to track the sellers and purchasers who were believed to be connected to Mexican drug cartels. During the Fast and Furious investigation, nearly 2,000 firearms were illegally purchased for $1.5 million, according to a DOJ Inspector General report. Hundreds of guns were later recovered in the United States and Mexico. In 2010, two of the weapons linked to Fast and Furious turned up near the scene of the murder of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry in the Arizona desert. Whistleblowing led to investigations by the Senate Judiciary Committee and the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. During the House investigation, Attorney General Eric Holder was cited for contempt. Fast and Furious was one of the operations under Project Gunrunner, part of the Department of Justice's broader National Southwest Border Counter-Narcotics Strategy. Operation Fast and Furious was not the ATF's first gun-walking investigation, which allowed illegally purchased firearms to, quote-unquote, walk out of gun shops. It was preceded by Operation Wide Receiver, which began in 2006, end quote. So, our own government was selling firearms to Mexican drug cartels, and those guns ended up being connected to all sorts of crimes. Does that not put America's security at risk? Do you think the white hats in the military would be okay with this going on? The Clinton email scandal. From the BBC, quote, Hillary Clinton has been cleared for a second time by the FBI over her use of a private email server while Secretary of State. What's it all about? In July, an FBI investigation concluded no reasonable prosecutor would bring a criminal case against Mrs. Clinton but that she and her aides were extremely careless in their handling of classified information. Then the FBI surprised everyone 11 days before the election by announcing it was examining newly discovered emails sent or received by Hillary Clinton. 2 days before voting booths opened across the nation, FBI Director James Comey announced he was standing by his original assessment that Mrs. Clinton should not face criminal charges. So, how did we get here? Shortly before she was sworn in as Secretary of State in 2009, Hillary Clinton set up an email server at her home in Chappaqua, New York. She then relied on this server, home to the email address hdr22@clintonemail.com, for all her electronic correspondence, both work-related and personal, during her 4 years in office. She also reportedly set up email addresses on the server for her longtime aide, Huma Abedin, and State Department Chief of Staff, Cheryl Mills. She did not use or even activate a state.gov email account, which would have been hosted on servers owned and managed by the U.S. government. Mrs. Clinton's email system became a national story the first week of March 2015, when the New York Times ran a front-page article on the subject. The article said that the system may have violated federal requirements and was alarming to current and former government archive officials. Skeptics have countered that the real reason Mrs. Clinton established her own email system was because it gave her total control over her correspondence. With her email setup, she became the sole arbiter of what should and shouldn't be provided to the government, made public via Freedom of Information requests, or turned over to interested parties such as the Congressional Committee investigating the 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. According to the State Department Inspector General report, in 2010, Mrs. Clinton told her Deputy Chief of Staff that one of her concerns with email is that she did not want any risk of the personal being accessible. An FBI investigation found that Mrs. Clinton used numerous personal devices while in office and relied on several email servers. Clinton staffers told the FBI that they destroyed some of the replaced devices with a hammer, while they could not account for others. According to Mrs. Clinton, she sent or received 62,320 emails during her time as Secretary of State. She or her lawyers have determined about half of those, 30,490, roughly 55,000 pages, were official and have been turned over to the State Department. Mrs. Clinton said the other emails are private, relating to topics like her daughter's wedding, her mother's funeral, and yoga routines. At Hillary Clinton's request, the State Department released the first set of emails sent on her private account in May 2015, with many relating to the 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. In early August 2015, she signed an affidavit swearing she had turned over all copies of government records from her time in office. The FBI found several thousand work-related emails that were not turned over to the State Department, although it concluded that the emails were deleted prior to 2014 and were not intentionally removed in an effort to conceal them. About 3,000 emails are expected to be released in the run-up to Election Day, but many more will not be processed until after 8 November, end quote. Patel continues. In 2015, Peter Schweitzer published the book Clinton Cash, the untold story of how and why foreign governments and businesses helped make Bill and Hillary rich. Quote, Clinton Cash is an investigation of the foreign benefactors of Bill and Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation. It investigates alleged connections between Clinton Foundation donors and Hillary Clinton's work at the State Department. The book argues that the Clinton family accepted lavish donations and speaking fees from foreign donors at times when the State Department was considering whether to award large contracts to groups and people affiliated with those donors. One of those donors was Mohammed Hussein Alamoudi, an Ethiopian and Saudi Arabian billionaire businessman. The book has 11 chapters. Some chapters focus on particular transactions or deals, such as the creation of Eurasia Energy and Uranium One in Kazakhstan, and the connection shareholders had and have to the Clintons. Other chapters focus on a broader set of relationships, particularly with regard to Bill Clinton's paid speeches during the years Hillary Clinton served as Secretary of State, and whether those paying for his speeches had significant business before the State Department. Schweitzer dubs the Clintons' blend of government service and private remuneration the Clinton blur. Hillary Clinton is basically Joe Biden in a pantsuit with a mean streak for suiciding anyone who might have dirt on her. Both are products of the corrupt political establishment they are beholden to, and both sold out their country for personal gain. The Iran nuclear deal. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly referred to as the Iran nuclear deal, is certainly one of the more complex scandals. There appears to be much more than meets the eye. The Wall Street Journal summarized it best, quote, "The Obama administration followed up a plane load of $400 million in cash sent to Iran in January with 2 more such shipments in the next 19 days, totaling another $1.3 billion, according to congressional officials briefed by the U.S. State, Treasury, and Justice Departments. The cash payments, made in Swiss francs, euros, and other currencies, settled a decades-old dispute over a failed arms deal dating back to 1979. U.S. officials have acknowledged the payment of the first $400 million coincided with Iran's release of American prisoners and was used as leverage to ensure they were flown out of Tehran's Mehrabad on the morning of January 17th. End quote. This from The Hill. Quote, "These were facts that former President Obama knew when he deliberately chose a policy of appeasement and cash payoffs instead of strength and accountability as the way to deal with Iran. President Trump spelled this out in no uncertain terms on Wednesday when he addressed the nation while seeking to dial down the imminent threat Iran may pose to our nation, the Middle East, and the world. Said the president, in part, quote, "Iran's hostilities substantially increased after the foolish Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2013, and they were given $150 billion, not to mention $1.8 billion in cash. Then Iran went on a terror spree, funded by the money from the deal, and created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration." End quote. As we have seen and heard, some, especially Democrats, their allies in the media, and Obama supporters, chose to challenge or quibble with Trump's statement. That said, I spoke with a former senior intelligence official who said that much of the $1.8 billion cash payment from the Obama administration was used explicitly to fund terrorism as an additional screw you from the leaders of Iran, including Soleimani, to the United States. The rest of the money, my source believes, ended up in the bank accounts of corrupt Iranian leaders and terrorists. The cash payment authorized by Obama is one of the most disgraceful and shameful, quote-unquote, negotiations in the history of our nation. It was a payment the Obama White House first denied, then ignored, and then grudgingly acknowledged, end quote. Patel continues, "Think about how our military felt about the Iran nuclear deal. The United States had been fighting a war on terrorism in the Middle East dating back to 2001, and President Barack Obama gave cash to our enemies and released prisoners back to them. I don't want to speculate, but this deal smells fishy, and I cannot imagine our military was okay with it. The Iran nuclear deal clearly put our national security at risk." the Benghazi attack. This is where things get interesting, because this is where we start to see some familiar faces from the Devolution series. First, let's look at some background that I have copied and pasted from Ballotpedia. I will leave all the citations for your reference. There's plenty more to this story, but again, for the sake of brevity, I will try only to cover the relevant details. First, on September 11th, 2012, Ambassador Stevens was in Benghazi, meeting with Libyan officials in search of Muammar Gaddafi's weapons stockpiles. He was also there to open a cultural center. The attack on the U.S. mission started around 9:40 p.m. when gunshots and an explosion were heard. The militia overpowered the main gate and burned the barracks building. At about 10 p.m., the militia broke through the compound wall, and the ambassador went to the safe room with information officer Sean Smith. The CIA annex, located approximately a mile away, was notified of the attack. While Stevens and Smith were in a safe room, the building was set on fire using diesel fuel, causing smoke to fill the building. The CIA agents and 16 Libyan security guards regained control of the compound and began searching for Stevens and Smith. The first drones were sent over the site as President Obama began to meet with the Secretary of Defense and the chair of the Joint Chiefs. An email indicating the group Ansar al-Sharia claimed the attack was sent from the U.S. State Department to the White House. At about 1:15 a.m. on September 12th, a rescue team from Tripoli arrived in Benghazi. Those rescued from the mission were at the CIA annex, including Stevens. Deputy Mission Chief Gregory Hicks notified Secretary of State Hillary Clinton that Americans in Benghazi needed to be evacuated at 2 a.m. At about 4 a.m., the militants attacked the CIA annex and killed Navy SEALs Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods. The bodies of Stevens, Smith, Doherty, and Woods were on the final plane out of Libya at 10 a.m. on September 12th. Although senior White House officials initially labeled the attack a spontaneous reaction to an anti-Muslim video made by an American that was circulating in the region, the Obama administration acknowledged on September 19th, 2012, that it was a premeditated terrorist attack. Then there is this article from Glenn Kessler of the Washington Post. There have been many questions raised about the development of the administration's talking points in the aftermath of the attack on Benghazi, Libya, that left 4 Americans dead, including the U.S. ambassador. There have been allegations that the administration deliberately covered up the fact that this was a terrorist attack. We have noted before in our extensive timeline of Benghazi statements how long it took the president to concede that point in the midst of his re-election campaign. But with the release of 12 versions of the talking points Friday by ABC News, perhaps there is an alternative explanation. This basically was a bureaucratic knife fight, pitting the State Department against the CIA. In other words, the final version of the talking points may have been so wan because officials simply deleted everything that upset the two sides, so they were left with nothing. Let's examine the evidence for a bureaucratic explanation. First, some important context. Although the ambassador was killed, the Benghazi quote-unquote consulate was not a consulate at all, but basically a secret CIA operation which included an effort to round up shoulder-launched missiles. In fact, only 7 of the 30 Americans evacuated from Benghazi had any connection to the State Department. The rest were affiliated with the CIA. The official reports, such as the one from the Accountability Review Board and the Senate Homeland Security Committee report, essentially dance around that uncomfortable fact. Quote from the Accountability Review Board. In December 2011, the Undersecretary for Management approved a 1-year continuation of the U.S. Special Mission in Benghazi, which was never a consulate and never formally notified to the Libyan government. From the Senate report, quote, The attacks in Benghazi occurred at two different locations: a Department of State temporary mission facility and an annex facility approximately a mile away used by another agency of the United States government. So, from the State Department perspective, this was an attack on a CIA operation, perhaps by the very people the CIA was battling. And the ambassador, tragically, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But, for obvious reasons, the administration could not publicly admit that Benghazi was mostly a secret CIA effort. The talking points were originally developed by the CIA at the request of a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Interestingly, all of the versions are consistent on one point: that the attacks were, quote, spontaneously inspired by protests at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, a fact later deemed to be incorrect. The talking points through Friday begin to become rather detailed, at which point there is sharp pushback from the State Department. Let's look at the version as of 5:09 p.m. on September 14th, Friday, and see the red flags for state. The talking points refer to a direct assault against the U.S. consulate. The CIA says it, quote, warned of social media reports calling for a demonstration in front of the embassy and that jihadists were threatening to break into the embassy. The CIA says it, quote, has produced numerous pieces on the threat of extremists in Benghazi and eastern Libya. It cites, quote, at least 5 other attacks against foreign interests and says it cannot rule out the individuals had previously surveilled the U.S. facilities. The clear implication is that state screwed up, even though internally it was known that this was a CIA operation. State Department spokeswoman Victoria Nuland especially objects to the reference to previous warnings, saying it, quote, could be abused by members of Congress to beat up the State Department for not paying attention to warnings, end quote. Moreover, Nuland had been constrained from saying much about the attack at her daily press briefings, so she was unsure why the agency would suddenly give so much information to members of Congress. After the CIA makes minor changes, such as deleting a reference to the militant group Ansar al-Sharia, Nuland responds, quote, these changes don't resolve all of my issues or those of my building's leadership, end quote. At that point, a White House official weighs in and writes in an email, quote, we must make sure that the talking points reflect all agency equities, including those of the State Department, and we don't want to undermine the FBI investigation. We thus will work through the talking points tomorrow morning at the Deputies Committee meeting, end quote. Update. CNN says it obtained an actual copy of this email, and it differs from how it was previously reported, particularly because there was no specific mention of the State Department. Quote, we need to resolve this in a way that respects all of the relevant equities, particularly the investigation. We can take this up tomorrow morning at the deputies, end quote. The final version of the talking points shows what happened. Just about everything was cut, leaving virtually nothing. The reference to consulate was also deleted, replaced by diplomatic post. From a bureaucratic perspective, it may have seemed like the best possible solution at the time. From a political perspective, it turned out to be a disaster. For reasons unknown, the White House sent UN Ambassador Susan E. Rice on 5 Sunday shows with those talking points. And the rest is history. The talking points were so weak that Rice immediately raised suspicions that the administration was hiding something important. She instantly earned Pinocchio's. She also repeatedly referenced the supposed impact of an anti-Islam video, which was never part of talking points. Further investigation may make the bureaucratic explanation moot. But in Washington, one should never underestimate the importance of internal conflict between agencies. Patel continues. The administration could not publicly admit that Benghazi was mostly a secret CIA effort. Internal conflict between agencies. Will we ever know the true scope of what happened during Benghazi? Maybe not. There's definitely more to the story. However, I now want to discuss how this relates to the theme of the article, that our corrupt political establishment and their actions are at odds with the military and their duty to uphold the security and independence of the United States. This is where we see ties between Benghazi and devolution. Let's once again look into the background of the man at the epicenter of the Devolution series, Christopher C. Miller. Some relevant background. Christopher Miller, quote, "But those who know the former Army Special Forces officer and have worked with him describe him as a standout leader who has, at every level of his career, kept perspective on the national impacts of his work and overarching defense strategy. As a company commander with 5th Special Forces Group, Miller helped to direct the first covert invasion of Afghanistan following the September 11, 2001 terror attacks. A small number of Green Berets from 5th Group, some of them on horseback, were sent to defeat the Taliban in an operation depicted years later in the feature film 12 Strong. According to Jason Amarine, a former member of the unit, Miller was in no small part responsible for the way that first deployment took place. Amarine says Chris basically got 5th Group into the war. He said, now a future of war fellow at the New America think tank, told military.com, quote, "In 2001, as we prepared for Afghanistan, there really was no coherent plan initially, and big disagreements between special operations, CIA, and the White House. Basically, Chris Miller volunteered 5th Group to become the Joint Special Operations Task Force, to become JSOTF North, and spearhead the invasion of Afghanistan. Important to note that as far back as 2001, our military was at odds with the political establishment. The subject matter of these types of disagreements are what negatively affect our national security." The article continues. At the time, Amarine was a captain in a Special Forces A team, ODA-574. Miller, a 35-year-old major, was part of a B team, a headquarters element. But on December 5th, 2001, after an infamous B-52 bomber friendly fire airstrike that left 3 American soldiers and 10 Afghan troops dead inside Amaqale in Afghanistan's Uruzgan province, it was Miller's team that came in as a quick reaction force to support Amarine's devastated forces. Amarine described Miller as a man universally admired in the Special Forces world of prima donnas, end quote. Patel continues. This is an interesting story and something that I want you to keep in mind as I continue. Miller and his team came in as a quick reaction force in response to a friendly fire airstrike. A quick reaction force, QRF, is, quote, "an armed military unit capable of rapidly responding to developing situations, typically to assist allied units in need of such assistance. They are to have equipment ready to respond to any type of emergency, typically within 10 minutes or less. That is based on Unit Standard Operating Procedures, SOPs." Here's another example from 2003 discussing the QRF team, Quick Response Force. QRF team from the recently abandoned Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan. 10th Mountain Division soldiers provide quick reaction force by Sergeant Greg Heath, USA Special to American Forces Press Service, Bagram, Afghanistan, October 17th, 2003. Like firemen on duty at a firehouse, 10th Mountain Division infantry soldiers who make up Bagram's quick reaction force sit in their hut near the airfield, always ready to extinguish any problems coalition forces may have in the area. Inside the modest hut are wall-to-wall bunks stacked 3 high and a living area for the soldiers of Company C, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment, whose platoons perform 24 hours QRF duty on a rotational basis. The QRF soldiers are prepared for a wide variety of combat-related missions, and if Bagram or coalition soldiers were ever attacked, the QRF soldiers could gather their gear and be on a CH-47 Chinook helicopter ready to be flown into action in a very short period of time, according to 3rd Platoon Leader, 1st Lieutenant Stephen Helm. "We can be called on for anything," said Team Leader Corporal Sean Hurst, 3rd Platoon. "We're ready all the time for anything imaginable that could happen." Back to Chris Miller. Quote, "Miller would ultimately become the commander of 2nd Battalion, 5th Special Forces Group, having been part of the 2003 Iraq invasion and completed multiple additional deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. According to documents made public ahead of his confirmation to lead the National Counterterrorism Center, Miller also spent 3 years of his Army career detailed from the Department of Defense to the intelligence community. Following his 2014 retirement from the Army, he went to the Pentagon, working for 2 years as a contracted special operations consultant to the Undersecretaries of Defense for Intelligence and Policy. Then, from March 2018 to December 2019, he joined the National Security Council at the White House, serving as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Counterterrorism and Transnational Threats. On January 6th, 2020, Miller became the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism, a position he'd hold until his confirmation as NCTC Director on August 10th of this year. Miller also spent 3 years of his Army career detailed from the DoD to the intelligence community. More specifically, starting sometime in 2011 through sometime in 2014, Chris Miller was in his last assignment as an Army officer as Director for Special Operations and Irregular Warfare in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations / Low Intensity Conflict and Interdependent Capabilities at the Pentagon. For those of you who don't know, we're back to Patel at this point. As the Director for Special Operations and IW in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations / Low Intensity Conflict, he would be the 3rd highest in command, specifically for Special Operations at the DoD, directly reporting to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Counterterrorism, who directly reported to the ASD SO/LIC. This is a position located in the Pentagon. Here is a slideshow from July 2014 prepared by then Colonel Christopher Miller, showing the somewhat confusing org chart. I've simplified it for you to illustrate the chain of command during his time as Director for SO/IW. All right, here we are. Secretary of Defense, ASD for SO/LIC, and then under that, Partnership Strat, Stability Ops, Special Ops and Counterterrorism under that, Counter Narcotics and Global Threats, and then he reports directly to Special Ops and Counterterrorism, Christopher Miller, Director of Special Ops and Irregular Warfare, IW. During the Benghazi raid on September 11th, 2012, Chris Miller was watching the events unfold from the Pentagon and was part of the team that would have been making operational decisions. In other words, he was present and directly involved when special operations were halted from responding to Benghazi attacks. Quote, hours later, according to excerpts of the account by the U.S. diplomat Gregory Hicks, American officials in the Libyan capital sought permission to deploy 4 U.S. Special Operations troops to Benghazi aboard a Libyan military aircraft early the next morning. The troops were told to stand down. Jason Chaffetz, Republican representative from Utah, said, "The White House and the Pentagon have allowed us to believe that there were no military options on the table. The motto of the military is to leave no person behind, and it's stunning and unacceptable to think we had military willing and ready to go, and the Pentagon told them to stand down. That's just not the American. Back to Patel. There were special operations, quick reaction forces with ability to get to Benghazi, but they were ordered to stand down by the Pentagon. Who at the Pentagon ordered the stand down? The Benghazi incident led to multiple congressional investigations as described by Ballotpedia. From Ballotpedia, Senate investigation, quote, "The investigation report released on January 15, 2014 by the Senate Intelligence Committee said that the State Department failed to increase security at its mission despite warnings and blamed intelligence agencies for not sharing information about the existence of the CIA outpost with the U.S. military, according to the Washington Post. The Senate Intelligence Committee released the following statement along with a 58-page declassified report on the Benghazi attack. The committee found the attacks were preventable based on extensive intelligence reporting on the terrorist activity in Libya, to include prior threats and attacks against Western targets, and given the known security shortfalls at the U.S. mission. House Select Committee on Benghazi. On May 8, 2014, Representative Trey Gowdy, Republican of South Carolina, was chosen to lead a special committee investigating the attack in Benghazi and the administration's actions regarding the attack. The committee was made up of 7 Republicans and 5 Democrats. When asked if the U.S. State Department would comply with the committee's requests, Secretary of State John Kerry stated, "We'll respond because we have absolutely nothing to hide whatsoever, and I look forward to complying with whatever responsibilities we have." The 12 members named in the House Select Committee on Benghazi were Trey Gowdy, Susan Brooks, Jim Jordan, Mike Pompeo, Martha Roby, Peter Roskam, Lynn Westmoreland, Elijah Cummings, Adam Smith, Adam Schiff, Linda Sanchez, and Tammy Duckworth. The investigation, back to Patel, the investigation by the House Select Committee on Benghazi culminated in an 800-plus page report. Representatives Jim Jordan and Mike Pompeo took things a step further and issued an addendum to the report because they felt Chairman Trey Gowdy's effort did not sufficiently criticize the Obama administration's handling of the attacks. Here is the link to the addendum to the report and a few key screenshots of the conclusions and unanswered questions. Summary of conclusions. 1. The first victim of war is truth. The administration misled the public about the events in Benghazi. Officials at the State Department, including Secretary Clinton, learned almost in real time that the attack in Benghazi was a terrorist attack. With the presidential election just 56 days away, rather than tell the American people the truth and increase the risk of losing an election, the administration told one story privately and a different story publicly. They publicly blamed the deaths on a video-inspired protest they knew had never occurred. 2. Last clear chance. Security in Benghazi was woefully inadequate and Secretary Clinton failed to lead. The State Department has many posts, but Libya and Benghazi were different. After Gaddafi, the U.S. knew that we would not be able to count on host nation security in a country where militias held significant power. The American people expect that when the government sends our representatives into such dangerous places, they receive adequate protection. Secretary Clinton paid special attention to Libya. She sent Ambassador Stevens there, yet in August 2012, she missed the last clear chance to protect her people. 3. Failure of will. America did not move heaven and earth to rescue our people. The American people expect their government to make every effort to help those we put in harm's way when they find themselves in trouble. The U.S. military never sent assets to help rescue those fighting in Benghazi and never made it into Libya with personnel during the attack. And contrary to the administration's claim that it could not have landed in Benghazi in time to help, the administration never directed men or machines into Benghazi. 4. Justice denied. The administration broke its promise to bring the terrorists to justice. After the attacks, President Obama promised justice will be done. There is no doubt our nation can make good on that commitment. Yet, almost 4 years later, only one of the terrorists has been captured and brought to the United States to face criminal charges. Even that terrorist will not receive the full measure of justice after the administration chose not to seek the death penalty. The American people are owed an explanation. 5. Unanswered questions. The administration did not cooperate with the investigation. Despite its claims, we saw no evidence that the administration held a sincere interest in helping the committee find the truth about Benghazi. There is a time for politics and a time to set politics aside. A national tragedy is one of those times when, as a nation, we should join together to find the truth. That did not happen here. So, while the investigation uncovered new information, we nonetheless end the committee's investigation without many of the facts, especially those involving the president and the White House, who we were chartered to obtain. Why were diplomats stationed in Benghazi in the first place? And more importantly, why did they stay as it became more and more dangerous? Why did the State Department ignore multiple requests for help from the team in Benghazi, leaving them to fend for themselves in a facility that was no match for a well-organized assault? Why did the U.S. military do almost nothing to help? And why did it take them so long to arrive in Libya and never prepare assets to arrive in Benghazi? Why did the administration mislead the American people about the nature and cause of the attack? Why, now almost 4 years later, has only one of the dozens of terrorists who murdered 4 of our countrymen faced American justice? Back to Patel. So, while I don't think we have the full scope of the Benghazi situation, here is what we do know. Chris Miller was in the Pentagon when the Special Operations QRF was told to stand down. Remember, these are people he personally worked with before being promoted to the Pentagon. How do you think he felt about that? Chris Miller was a member of one of those QRF teams back in 2001 at the start of the war. I can't imagine the same man who volunteered his team to be a QRF for the 2001 mission referenced above would be at all okay with the Pentagon's response, or lack thereof, to the Benghazi incident. The political establishment was using the military to advance their political agendas. They created a bureaucratic chain of command in which operational decisions were made through the Pentagon. I don't think this sat well with Chris Miller, and I believe I can prove it. Here are Chris Miller's comments from November 18th, 2020, when he, along with Ezra Cohen-Watnick, announced the elevation of United States Special Operations to a level on par with that of the other branches of the armed services. From Chris Miller's statement, November 18th, 2020, quote, "Good morning, everyone. Wow, what a week. That old cliche, if you want a friend in Washington, D.C., get a dog, may be true for many. But for me, I know I can come to Fort Bragg and be with my brothers and sisters in Special Operations Forces who will always have my back. It is an honor to be here on this hallowed plaza, where we are reminded of the enormous sacrifices and burdens shouldered by our nation's special operators. These brave heroes were first to the enemy's doorstep. Mark, in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks in 2001, only weeks after that dark day in our nation's history, they plunged into danger to bring justice to the terrorists who took thousands of innocent American lives, and they will be the ones who continue to deny safe haven to violent extremists and maintain unrelenting pressure on the road to stability and lasting peace in Afghanistan and Iraq. I know firsthand the caliber and character of these brave service members having served as an Army Special Forces Company commander under then Colonel John Mulholland during Operation Enduring Freedom, and with Mark, of course. I also served 2 tours in Iraq, including during the 2003 invasion and later in 2006 as a Special Forces Battalion commander, 2nd Battalion, the Special Forces Group. Absolutely the best Special Forces battalions in the history of the world. No offense. I spent the remainder of my career just as committed to defeating terrorists and those that would help harbor them. Yesterday, the president ordered the downsizing of our force presence in Afghanistan and Iraq, 2,500 troops in each country by 15 January 2021, in a manner that protects our fighting men and women and our hard-earned gains. At the same time, you all know this, should any malign actors underestimate our resolve or attempt to undermine our efforts, we will not hesitate to restore deterrence and defeat any and all threats. As we implement the president's orders, we also recognize that transitions and campaigns are fraught with risk and unexpected challenges and opportunities. That is why I'm here today to announce this. This is an omen. I'm here today to announce that I directed the Special Operations civilian leadership to report directly to me instead of through the current bureaucratic channels. This historic step finalizes what Congress has authorized and directed and will put Special Operations Command on par with the military services for the first time. This reform will immediately improve agility to the department and the command and will enable us to streamline information flow, enhance decision-making, and more adaptively and adeptly support our commanders and their superb soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Change is often tectonic in the Department of Defense. This is by design, and as our history shows, has served the nation very well. Today's reforms are directly aligned with all 3 of my priorities, as outlined in my message to the force on Monday. First, bring the current war to an end in a responsible manner that guarantees the security of our citizens. 2, continue implementing the National Defense Strategy with an emphasis on transforming the department for great power competition. And 3, accelerate the department's activities to contribute to our whole of government effort to combat transnational threats. Today, with the strong support of President Trump, we are forging the next chapter in the history of the United States Special Operations Forces in formalizing a watershed reform. Right now, we start the transition to provide greater civilian oversight and critical advocacy for our special operators. This couldn't come at a more critical moment in time as we bring our nation's longest conflict to a responsible end and prepare our special operations forces for this new era of great power competition. I can think of no better place than here, at the original home of our special operations forces, to enshrine stronger support for the next generation of special operators, hardened by combat and unrelenting deployments, who understand the fundamental nature of war, who remain committed to defeating every threat, and who are undeterred by the high price of victory. Back to Patel. This reform will immediately improve agility to the department and the command, and will enable us to streamline information flow, enhance decision-making, and more adaptively and adeptly support our commanders and their superb soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. This almost feels like a direct shot at the Obama administration and their handling of Benghazi. Chris Miller and the Special Operations Forces account for just one aspect of the Benghazi incident. General Michael Flynn accounts for the other. I'll try to summarize this as best I can. General Michael Flynn was never scared to speak his mind. It was often critical of the Obama administration and the reality of the war in Iraq and deficiencies within the intelligence community. Quote, ironically, the barriers to maximizing available intelligence are surprisingly few. The deficit of data needed by high-level analysts does not arise from a lack of reporting in the field. There are literally terabytes of unclassified and classified information typed up at the grassroots level, nor, remarkably, is the often assumed unwillingness to share information the core of the problem. On the contrary, military officers and civilians working with ISAF allies and even many NGOs are eager to exchange information. True, there are severe technological hurdles, such as the lack of a common database and digital network available to all partners, but they are not insurmountable. The most salient problems are attitudinal, cultural, and human. The intelligence community's standard mode of operation is surprisingly passive about aggregating information that is not enemy-related and relaying it to decision makers or fellow analysts further up the chain. It is a culture that is strangely oblivious to how little analytical products, as they now exist, actually influence commanders. It is also a culture that is emphatic about secrecy, but regrettably less concerned about mission effectiveness. To quote General McChrystal in a recent meeting, our senior leaders, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of Defense, Congress, and the President of the United States are not getting the right information to make decisions with. We must get this right. The media is driving the issues. We need to build a process from the censor all the way to the political decision makers. End quote. Back to Patel. Flynn was commissioned in the U.S. Army as a second lieutenant in military intelligence in 1981. His military assignments included multiple tours, and he had an extensive career in military intelligence. He and his superior, General McChrystal, streamlined all intelligence so as to increase the tempo of operations and degrade the networks of al-Qaeda in Iraq. He served as the Director of Intelligence of the United States Central Command from June 2007 to July 2008, as the Director of Intelligence of the Joint Staff from July 2008 to June 2009, then the Director of Intelligence of the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan from June 2009 to October 2010. In September 2011, Flynn was promoted to Lieutenant General and assigned as Assistant Director of National Intelligence in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. On April 17, 2012, President Barack Obama nominated Flynn to be the 18th Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Flynn took command of the DIA in July 2012. He simultaneously became commander of the Joint Functional Component Command for Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance, the chair of the Military Intelligence Board. Flynn was seeing the most classified military intelligence available. In mid-2014, his two-year term at the DIA was not extended. On April 30th, 2014, Flynn announced his retirement, effective later that year, about a year earlier than he had been scheduled to leave his position. He was reportedly effectively forced out of the DIA after clashing with superiors over his allegedly chaotic management style and vision for the agency. According to what Flynn had said in one final interview as DIA director, he felt like a lone voice in thinking the United States was less safe from the threat of Islamic terrorism in 2014 than it was prior to the 9/11 attacks. He went on to believe he was pressed into retirement for questioning the Obama administration's public narrative that al-Qaeda was close to defeat. Flynn retired from the U.S. Army with 33 years of service on August 7th, 2014. On November 10th, 2015, Flynn gave an interview to the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction Lessons Learned project, later published as part of the Afghanistan Papers. Lessons learned. Introduction. I think that in general, You'll be part of the history of this thing, the war in Afghanistan, obviously, because what Seagar's role has been for a long time. I used to go down and sit with the Seagar people in Kandahar just to chat with them, have a cup of coffee, see what they were up to. Never mind not accomplishing our mission, but the severity of corruption in our own system, I think, is just unbelievable. The waste that I saw is unbelievable. You just sit there and go, you've got to be kidding me. Why did we do this? I think that somebody someday will sit down and do some very serious research with data, which they could discover about this problem. A friend of mine just did an assessment in Iraq. He's a very serious gentleman in this case. He is discovering how little data we actually have kept for the new military organization. The Secretary of Defense has just appointed our general in Iraq, U.S. Army 3rd Corps. It is amazing. He, my friend conducting the assessment, did a good solid 45 days and went into theater. He has an extraordinary background in the whole theater, but definitely in Iraq. He just told me the other day that it's like we're starting from scratch. In this era of data and information that we have all these things, all this stuff, but everybody goes and then takes the data when they leave. You do your right seat ride. We actually have taken right seat rides for granted. I'm in the process of writing a book right now, and part of it is how we've gotten away from that. We're such a strong country, but we've gotten away from the idea of how actually to win anything. There is a machinery that is behind what we do, and it keeps us participating in the conflict because it generates wealth. It generates wealth all around and on both sides. Well, all sides. There are more than two sides. All of a sudden, I step out of that and I return to a series of assignments, starting with CENTCOM, then the Joint Staff, then back into Afghanistan with ISAF. I then held the Assistant Director for National Intelligence position, then to DIA. I went back into a world with a very conventional, very structured, very cautious, very archaic intelligence system. That is, of course, true beside the time in Afghanistan, where I realized that what we needed to change. So as I was watching things unfold from my perch at CENTCOM, then from my perch at the Joint Staff, particularly inside of the region and inside of Afghanistan, and listening to the failures that we were having, it started to strike me that we were doing a whole range of things incorrect. I am actually looking at the intelligence, and I'm saying the intelligence is actually pretty good. The strategic assessment, if you go back, and I'm not sure if you guys could do this, you might want to go back and look at the NIEs at least. But if you went and looked at the strategic intelligence assessments from Central Command from the last 10 years, you would find a stark clarity as to what the intelligence system was assessing in Afghanistan pretty clearly. I think it was very clear. The policy decisions and the operational decisions, I don't think matched what the intelligence was saying. I think there is a biasness. I'm going to draw you a picture here. The intelligence system, I thought, was very accurate on the who is who in the zoo there, so to speak. Who is who in the leadership of those who we were facing in Afghanistan, and also the members of the international coalition. The international coalition was also corrupt and also saw the U.S. money coming in and took advantage of it. Don't think it was just the Afghans. There was a lot of intel about other countries and people that were taking advantage of deals, including us. That is why I say that there is probably criminal cases waiting to be had against people who found weaknesses in our system. Even soldiers and other government officials found weaknesses in our system to make money. The tactical intelligence and the reporting that was captured in terms of written down and databased in some computer system that described corruption was unbelievable. There was plenty of it. CIA versus ISAF intelligence. What I learned was that the CIA was not sharing all of their information with the Department of Defense or the rest of the intelligence community for that matter. I asked why, and they said it was operational traffic. So the CIA has operational cables that don't make it into intelligence reporting, which is absolutely irresponsible. They are an intelligence agency, so their operational traffic and their intelligence traffic, to me, is intelligence. I don't need, in their operational traffic, their sourcing. I need the richness of the report. What I saw was the incredibly ineffective reporting system that the CIA has. I hands-on saw it. I know what their system is. They were not providing intelligence from operational reports to the rest of the intelligence community. So now you have this disconnect. And I wanted to know about that disconnect. And when I asked why they couldn't share, they said it was operational traffic, not intel. So wait a second, you, CIA, you're an intel agency. This is where the intelligence leadership is irresponsible for not sharing intelligence in and among themselves. Back to the alliance I told you about that has better intelligence than the intelligence community because everything is intelligence to them. We would come up with the 83 districts for our campaign plan, and we used that big redaction next. I think that 83 was the number, and we might have added one additional district. General Rodriguez may have added on later on. It may have been around Kabul. Operationally, the reporting that comes out of there, ISAF, is wonderful. It is rosy. So I am on VTC with the Secretary of Defense, CENTCOM Commander, ISAF Commander with Crystal and Petraeus. And I give my presentation, and it sucks. It's almost like disregarded, but it's, okay, got it. Here's what we're going to do strategically. Back to Patel. Michael Flynn was somebody who knew where the bodies were buried. He was director of the Defense Intelligence Agency during Benghazi. Benghazi was the direct result of the Obama administration corruption, as detailed in this Fox News article written by General Michael Flynn himself. Quote, "The American public was told that the intervention in Libya was necessary to prevent a humanitarian crisis. But just as Hillary Clinton would describe the attack on our Benghazi diplomats as a spontaneous protest over a video, the military intervention that led inexorably to the debacle in Benghazi was sold on false pretenses to prevent an imminent massacre of civilians engaged in a pro-democracy uprising. Hillary Clinton described the 2011 Arab Spring rebellion in eastern Libya as a spontaneous pro-democracy uprising, but the Libyan connection to radical Islamic extremist groups was well known long before 2011. The region where the rebellion began was a fervid recruiting ground for jihadis who killed American forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. The leaders of the quote-unquote civilian uprising that Hillary Clinton supported were members of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, LIFG, who had pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda. They refused to take orders from non-Islamist commanders and assassinated the then leader of the rebel army, Abdel Fattah Yunus. Just as there was ample evidence that Hillary's pro-democracy protesters were radical Islamists, there was no truth to the assertion a civilian massacre was imminent. Libyan doctors told United Nations investigators that of the more than 200 corpses in Tripoli's morgues following fighting in late February 2011, only 2 were female. This indicates Gaddafi's forces targeted male combatants and did not indiscriminately attack civilians, nor had Gaddafi's forces attacked civilians after retaking towns from the rebels in early February 2011. While Muammar Gaddafi had a 40-year record of appalling human rights violations, his abuses did not include large-scale attacks on Libyan civilians. We restored full diplomatic relations with Gaddafi in 2007, and he was a key partner in counterterrorism efforts. LIFG and affiliated jihadis received at least 18 shipments of arms from Qatar with the blessings of the US, the Wall Street Journal reports. The arms shipments were funneled through none other than Ali al-Salabi, the Qatar cleric who brokered their release from prison. The Islamists were able to pay for the weapons because Clinton had convinced Obama to grant full diplomatic recognition to the rebels, against the advice of the State Department lawyers and the Secretary of Defense. As the Washington Post reported, this move, quote, allowed the Libyans access to billions of dollars from Gaddafi's frozen accounts. These arms shipments are significant for several reasons. It led to the indictment of American arms dealer Mark Turi, who was charged with selling weapons to Islamist militants in Libya through Qatar. The charges were dropped this week after Turi threatened to reveal emails showing Clinton had approved the sales. Here's where it gets very sticky for Secretary Clinton. The rebel leaders were on the State Department's foreign terrorist organization list. It is a direct violation of the law to provide material support for terrorist organizations under Chapter 18, United States Code, Sections 2339A and 2339B, penalties for providing or attempting to provide material support to terrorism include imprisonment from 15 years to life. Nor is the Qatar connection insignificant. Qatar has donated anywhere from $1 to $5 million to the Clinton Foundation, and emails reveal members of the Qatari royal family were privileged with back-channel meetings with Secretary Clinton at the State Department. While whipping up support for the Libya military campaign, Clinton told Arab leaders, "It's important to me personally," the Washington Post reported. Hillary Clinton's prosecution of foreign policy in Libya crossed several lines. She showed extremely bad judgment by ignoring military and intelligence officials. She let personal interests conflict with U.S. foreign policy, and most importantly, she may have broken the law. Again, back to Patel. By ignoring military and intelligence officials, she let personal interests conflict with U.S. foreign policy. Michael Flynn is perfectly describing the war between white hats in the military and the corrupt political establishment. Flynn was one of those intelligence officials ignored by Hillary Clinton due to her own personal interests. The above article was written using no classified information. Imagine what else Flynn knew from his time as director of the DIA, with access to the highest level of classified information within our military. Michael Flynn represented the biggest threat to the political establishment. This was the reason Obama told Trump not to hire Michael Flynn, which naturally Trump ignored. Quote from New York Times Magazine. Obama reportedly told Trump that Flynn was not fit for a high-level role in his administration at a November 10th meeting in the Oval Office. Flynn, who was an early Trump backer, had been fired as Obama's Defense Intelligence Agency head in 2014. Despite that history with Flynn, Trump reportedly thought Obama was joking when he told him not to bring Flynn into the White House. From John Harwood. More. Source tells Kay Welker NBC that Trump thought Obama was ribbing him by advising against hiring Flynn. Back to Patel. Of course, Trump knew he wasn't joking. Michael Flynn was exactly who Trump wanted and needed to help take down the political establishment once and for all. Trump knew it, and so did the political establishment. This leads us to the last scandal I'll be touching on from the Obama administration. Spygate. When Donald Trump won the 2016 election, the Obama administration, along with the entire political establishment, was shocked and in a panic. Their criminal enterprise was at risk of exposure. General Michael Flynn was their worst nightmare. They desperately needed Flynn out of the picture, so they turned to who they always turn to: the mainstream media, big tech, and the intelligence community. Those three groups colluded to create the false story that Flynn was a Russian agent. They framed Flynn to get him kicked from Trump's cabinet, and then they used that as a springboard to move forward with their fake Russia investigation. At the time, it was considered by many to be the greatest political crime in American history. In my opinion, it has only been surpassed by the theft of the 2020 election. On a broader scale, however, the election theft was perpetrated to cover up for the Russia hoax, along with the rest of their crimes, So maybe we can consider this whole series of events as one long, continuous political crime. The Silent War. Brian Cates is second to none when it comes to all things Spygate. It was one of his articles that first got me interested in politics. I urge you to read all of his work, but here is his latest piece, which I believe provides an excellent reminder as to what is coming. A quote from Brian Cates. A lot of people don't seem to grasp how problematic it would be for a president or an attorney general to be caught red-handed interfering with the special counsel's office investigating what were widely alleged to be serious and historical abuses of federal law enforcement and surveillance powers in the targeting of a political campaign during a presidential election. The fact is, and it appears many have kind of forgotten about it at this point and need to be reminded, the Department of Justice's own Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, released a damning report back in December 2019 that overwhelmingly demonstrated that a federal surveillance warrant of a former Trump campaign advisor was granted through deliberate fraud committed against the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISC, by the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane team and the private political operatives they were using as informants. Not only that, it subsequently turned out these political operatives working as FBI informants were actually paid employees of the other campaign in the 2016 election, that of presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Now, if that sounds like something that should never have been allowed to happen, one campaign feeding the FBI fake allegations against the other to get a federal agency to employ its considerable surveillance and law enforcement powers to target and politically damage its rival candidate before an American presidential election, you'd be exactly right. Supposedly, we didn't have a federal government where this kind of thing could even be attempted, much less successfully accomplished. Paid operatives should not have been able to become key informants for the FBI in a probe aimed at the Trump campaign. Before it was fully exposed, many people were confidently asserting that what happened in the Spygate scandal was impossible. And yet, it did happen. Every single carefully placed safeguard, federal regulation, and policy that should have prevented this scandal from occurring was somehow bypassed or subverted. Prosecutor John Durham's assigned task was to go in and break down the nuts and bolts activity of how exactly this entire federal government fiasco came about, to determine who did what and who should be held accountable for any criminal conduct. Back to Patel. This scandal is enormous, and yes, Durham is coming. It looks like Durham's report is being set up to drop around the same time as the Arizona forensic audit will be released. Those two reports will have earth-shattering consequences and will expose the biggest series of political crimes in our history. The Durham report will expose the corruption and scandals, and the audit report will expose the theft of an election and their cover-up. This brings us to the final piece of the deep state puzzle. The political establishment loves to use the phrase systemic racism in an attempt to pin all of America's problems under a label that serves only to cause more division and hide the causes of the actual problems. The reality is that the far bigger systemic problem in our country is that of systemic political corruption. Joe Biden is the byproduct of the systemic political corruption created and carried out by the political establishment. Biden is a lifetime government talking head who never actually accomplished anything noteworthy in terms of policy while in Congress, but became wildly successful selling his name and political clout for personal profit. Leading up to the 2020 election, it was discovered that Hunter Biden's laptop appeared to be abandoned at a computer repair store and supposedly had copious amounts of information detailing the corrupt business dealings of the Biden family. In order to protect Joe Biden's election chances, the propaganda wing of the political establishment buried and censored anybody who dared to cover it, calling it Russian disinformation. The reality is much different. From Business Insider, quote, "The Daily Mail claimed this week that forensics experts had verified the authenticity of messages and images in a laptop containing lurid details of Hunter Biden's private life. DailyMail.com, the US-focused website run by the British tabloid, published a long article on Thursday detailing the laptop's contents. The laptop became the subject of intense controversy before the November presidential election, when the New York Post claimed in October that it contained emails harmful to Joe Biden, then the Democrat nominee. The Post claimed that the materials from the laptop indicated that Joe Biden had been compromised by his son's business dealings in Ukraine, where he was on the board of the energy firm Burisma. Critics said other emails contained evidence of influence peddling by Hunter Biden in China. Neither claim was ever substantiated. The story of how the Post and later the Daily Mail obtained the machine's contents is convoluted. It was said to have been abandoned in a Delaware computer shop, then handed to allies of Donald Trump. Amid doubts about the authenticity of the information and briefings from U.S. intelligence agencies that it was likely part of a Russian disinformation campaign, Facebook and Twitter introduced measures to stop the Post's stories from being shared on the platforms. But the Daily Mail said that the laptop was indeed Hunter Biden's, and that it had obtained 103,000 text messages, 154,000 emails, and more than 2,000 photos from a copy of its hard drive. End quote. Back to Patel. The intelligence community, mainstream media, and big tech have done everything they can to provide cover for the Biden family in regards to what is on this laptop. We have to keep in mind who else might have had this information. Specifically, who else could have the laptop and be able to act upon what is inside? The answer is simple. It's the same people who have been fighting the political establishment for years, the same people with terabytes of data from Chinese defector Dong Jingwei, the same people who know COVID was a bioweapon, the same people who caught the political establishment stealing an election with help from a foreign adversary, the same people who are running the devolution operation. President Donald Trump and the military. The Biden crime family. Biden's entire presidency has been an abject failure. The most relevant failure is the situation in Afghanistan, because we are watching it play out live. There wasn't a death under President Trump's watch since February of 2020. Trump's policy in the Middle East was working. How did Joe Biden mess this up so badly? Did Trump play a role? Are Biden's decisions being made based on what's best for America or what is best for his bank account? Let's find out. On September 23rd, 2020, Senators Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley, the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, HSGAC, and the Senate Finance Committee, respectively, released a majority staff report entitled Hunter Biden, Burisma, and Corruption, the Impact on U.S. Government Policy and Related Concerns. There is plenty of corruption in this report, and I urge you to take the time to read through it yourself. But I'm going to walk through a few things from the report related specifically to China in order to show you how I believe it's related to the situation in Afghanistan. Quote, the first letter written regarding potential conflicts of interest was sent by Chairman Grassley on August 14, 2019, relating to the Henniges transaction. That was an Obama-era Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, approved transaction which gave control over to Henniges, an American maker of anti-vibration technologies with military applications, to a Chinese government-owned aviation company and a China-based investment firm with established ties to the Communist Chinese government. One of the companies involved in the Henniges transaction was a billion-dollar private investment fund called Bohai Harvest RST, BHR for short. BHR was reportedly formed in November 2013 by a merger between the Chinese government-linked firm Bohai Capital and a U.S. company named Rosemont Seneca Partners. Rosemont Seneca Partners was reportedly formed in 2009 by Hunter Biden, the son of then Vice President Joe Biden, by Chris Hines, the stepson of former Secretary of State John Kerry, and by others. The direct involvement of Hunter Biden and Hines in the acquisition of Henniges by the Chinese government creates a potential conflict of interest. Both are directly related to high-ranking Obama administration officials. The Department of State, then under Mr. Kerry's leadership, is also a CFIUS member and played a direct role in the decision to approve the Henniges transaction. The appearance of a potential conflict of interest in this case was particularly troubling, given Hunter Biden's history of investing in and collaborating with Chinese companies, including at least one that clearly poses a significant national security concern. This history with China precedes and follows the 2015 Henniges transaction. This report will discuss Hunter Biden's and Devon Archer's corporate entities and their links to the Communist Chinese government in more detail. Back to Patel. The Bidens knew prior to Joe winning the 2020 election that Hunter's, and therefore Joe's, foreign business dealings were conflicts of interest. Trump and the military knew this as well. On October 13th, 2019, Hunter committed, quote, not to serve on boards of or work on behalf of foreign-owned companies. New York from the mainstream press. And this is from marketwatch.com. Facing intense scrutiny from President Donald Trump and his Republican allies, Hunter Biden announced on Sunday that he will step down from the board of directors of a Chinese-backed private equity firm at the end of the month as part of a pledge not to work on behalf of any foreign-owned companies should his father win the presidency. Biden, the 49-year-old son of a Democratic presidential candidate, Joe Biden, revealed his plan in an internet post written by his attorney, George Messeres, who outlined a defense of the younger Biden's work in Ukraine and China, which have emerged as one of Trump's chief lines of attack against Hunter's father, despite no proof of impropriety. Hunter makes the following statement. Under a Biden administration, Hunter will readily comply with any and all guidelines or standards that President Biden may issue to address purported conflicts of interest or the appearance of such conflicts, including any restrictions related to overseas business interests. In any event, Hunter will agree not to serve on boards of or work on behalf of foreign-owned companies, Messeres writes. He continued, he will continue to keep his father personally uninvolved in his business affairs while availing himself as necessary and appropriate to the Office of the White House Counsel to help inform his application of the Biden administration's guidelines or standards to his business decision-making. End quote. It shouldn't surprise you that Hunter did not follow through on his commitment. On June 21st, 2021, the Washington Examiner reported that Hunter Biden still hasn't divested from Chinese government-linked investment firm. Quote, Hunter Biden still appears to hold an ownership stake in a Chinese government-linked investment firm, despite repeated pledges from President Joe Biden that his family would not have any foreign business ties. The troubled son of Joe Biden still holds a 10% equity stake in Bohai Harvest RST, Shanghai Equity Investment Fund Management Company, according to Chinese business records. Hunter Biden has reportedly been under criminal investigation as far back as 2018, as federal authorities scrutinize his taxes and potentially his foreign business dealings and the 51-year-old's financial transactions with China might be at the forefront. More details in a letter from Chuck Grassley from August 15th, 2019, from the letter. For example, in December of 2013, 1 month after Rosemont Seneca's merger with Bohai Capital to form BHR, Hunter Biden reportedly flew aboard Air Force Two with his father, then Vice President Biden, to China. While in China, he helped arrange for Jonathan Lee, CEO of Bohai Capital, to, quote, shake hands with Vice President Biden. Afterward, Hunter Biden met with Lee for reportedly a social meeting. After the China trip, BHR's business license was approved. In December of 2014, BHR also reportedly became an investor in China General Nuclear Power Corp, CGN, a state-owned energy company involved in building nuclear reactors. In April of 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, charged CGN with conspiracy to unlawfully engage and participate in the production and development of special nuclear material outside the United States, which would cause significant damage to our national security. Then, in August of 2015, Gemini Investments Limited, another Chinese government-linked entity, purchased 75% of Rosemont Realty, a sister company of Rosemont Seneca. Rosemont Realty became Gemini Rosemont, and it reportedly focused on purchasing American real estate. In September 2015, BHR joined with a subsidiary of the Aviation Industry Corporation of China, AVIC, to acquire Henniges for $600 million. AVIC acquired 51% of the company, and BHR acquired 49%. According to reports, the acquisition of Henniges by BHR and AVIC was, quote, the biggest Chinese investment into U.S. automotive manufacturing assets to date. Because the acquisition gave Chinese companies direct control of Henniges' anti-vibration technology, the transaction was reviewed by CFIUS. CFIUS approved the transaction despite reports that in 2007, years before BHR teamed up with AVIC's subsidiary, AVIC was reportedly involved in stealing sensitive data regarding the Joint Strike Fighter program. AVIC later reportedly incorporated the stolen data into China's J-20 and J-31 aircraft, end quote. Clearly, this financial dealing could be a threat to the national security of the United States by providing the CCP with Henniges' anti-vibration tech. Officials from the Pentagon expressed concern over this fact back in 2011 from freebeacon.com. Quote, a cyber espionage operation by China 7 years ago produced sensitive technology and aircraft secrets that were incorporated into the latest version of China's new J-20 stealth fighter jet, according to U.S. officials and private defense analysts. The Chinese cyber spying against the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II took place in 2007 under what U.S. intelligence agencies codenamed Operation Byzantine Hades, a large-scale, multi-year cyber program that targeted governments and industry. Defense officials said the stolen data was obtained by a Chinese military unit called a Technical Reconnaissance Bureau in the Chengdu province. The data was then passed to the state-run Aviation Industry Corp of China, AVIC. An AVIC subsidiary, the Chengdu Aircraft Industry Group, used the stolen data in building the J-20, said defense and intelligence officials familiar with reports of the illicit tech transfer. Pentagon security officials in 2011 opposed a joint venture between General Electric and AVIC over concerns that U.S. fighter jet technology would be diverted to AVIC's military aircraft programs. The Obama administration ignored the concerns and instead has since promoted the systematic loosening of technology controls on transfers to China. End quote. BHR plays a larger role to the overall story here. Let's dig in even further. As of August 30th, 2021, one of the companies in BHR's portfolio is Contemporary Amperex Technology Company Limited, CATL. There it is. CATL is the world's largest maker of electric vehicle batteries. From the Financial Times, quote, CATL dominates global production of lithium iron phosphate batteries, which use iron and phosphate rather than expensive metals such as nickel and cobalt. These batteries are used by Tesla in its short and medium-range electric cars made in Shanghai, some of which are exported to Europe. CATL charges ahead amount of GWH battery capacity in newly sold passenger EVs. CATL is number one. CATL is even contracted to supply lithium-ion batteries to Tesla. Quote from Global Times, Chinese electric vehicle battery giant contemporary Amperex technology company CATL will start to supply lithium-ion batteries to the American EV maker Tesla from January 2022 to December 2025, according to a notice released by CATL on Monday. CATL announced that in order to further extend and deepen the friendly and cooperative relationship with Tesla, the Chinese battery maker and its American partners signed a, quote, production pricing agreement on Friday. The final sales shall be subject to the actual settlement of the purchase order issued by Tesla, according to CATL. The new deal should be a continuation of the agreement signed between the two companies in February 2020, under which CATL agreed to supply lithium-ion batteries to Tesla from July 2020 to June 2022, end quote. Do you notice anything interesting regarding CATL's share price from the past year? Oh, okay. Yeah, so there's that. Starting right around November, their share price has nearly tripled. What happened in November? Oh, yeah, the CCP helped Joe Biden steal an election. It isn't a surprise that the share price of the world's largest maker of electric vehicle batteries has skyrocketed since Biden was, quote unquote, elected. Everybody saw this coming due to Biden's socialist agenda and green initiatives. Biden's green dream, made in China. From AmericanEnergyAlliance.org, quote, after years of planning, China now dominates the world's production of new generation batteries that are used in electric vehicles and most portable consumer electronics such as cell phones and laptops. As the demand for electric vehicles grows, it is expected that most of them will be built with Chinese batteries, and most of those batteries will be lithium-ion, which are also popular for cell phones and laptops because of their high energy per unit mass relative to other electrical energy storage systems. For the foreseeable future, the United States will be dependent on Chinese supply chains to produce the batteries that power America's technologies. That will be particularly true if Joe Biden is able to implement his clean energy and climate plans that will transform our energy system, creating an even bigger role for batteries. In 2019, Chinese chemical companies accounted for 80% of the world's total output of raw materials for advanced batteries. China controls the processing of pretty much all the critical minerals, rare earth, lithium, cobalt, and graphite. Of the 136 lithium-ion battery plants in the pipeline to 2029, 101 are based in China, the largest manufacturer of electric vehicle batteries with a 27.9% market share is China's contemporary Amperex Technology Company Limited, CATL, founded in 2011. Its chairman recently indicated that the company developed a power pack that lasts for more than 1 million miles, end quote. Recap. BHR was formed when Bohai Capital, a Chinese government-linked firm, merged with Rosemont Seneca Partners, company formed by Hunter Biden and Chris Hines, John Kerry's stepson. Hunter Biden currently has a 10% stake in BHR. CATL is one of the companies in BHR's portfolio. CATL is the world's largest maker of electric vehicle batteries. So, How does this relate to Afghanistan? This August 28th, 2021 article from Forbes provides us with the answer. Quote, China is already eyeing up Afghanistan's vast mineral wealth, using the excuse of wanting to help rebuild the war-torn country, now primarily ruled by the Taliban. In fact, the Americans hadn't even left Afghanistan before China's diplomats showed up to quote-unquote help, states a recent report from U.S. global investors. The report explains as follows, quote, mere hours after the Taliban completed its swift takeover of Afghanistan, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson said that Beijing was ready to participate in Afghanistan's reconstruction and development. Who can blame China? There's a lot of money to be made. Quote, the combined value of Afghanistan's minerals is estimated at between $1 to $3 trillion. By comparison, opium poppy production in the country was valued at only $350 million in 2020, the report states. Put another way, the mineral resources under the ground in Afghanistan could be worth almost 10 times the country's infamous opium crop. These minerals include lithium, gold, silver, platinum, iron, copper, aluminum, and uranium. Among those, lithium stands out as a real prize because it has become essential to the manufacture of the lithium-ion batteries used in electric vehicles. Better still for China, if it gets its way, is that Afghanistan is set to be the Saudi Arabia of Afghanistan. In other words, the Central Asian country is reputedly home to heaps of lithium. As the largest car market in the world, and the global move to EVs, China will likely want to secure every last pound of lithium that it can. End quote. You read that correctly. Before the dust even settled over Afghanistan from Biden's botched withdrawal, China was already in talks with the Taliban attempting to get their hands on those rare earth elements. From CNBC, China poised for bigger role in Afghanistan? Only hours after the Taliban overran Afghanistan, a foreign ministry spokeswoman said Beijing was ready for friendly cooperation with Afghanistan. On the basis of fully respecting the sovereignty of Afghanistan and the will of all factions in the country, China has maintained contact and communication with the Afghan Taliban and played a constructive role in promoting the political settlement of the Afghan issue, said spokeswoman Hua Chunying at a press conference on Monday. According to Hua, the Taliban said on multiple occasions that it looks forward to China's participation in Afghanistan's reconstruction and development. We are ready to continue to develop good neighborliness and friendly cooperation with Afghanistan and play a constructive role in Afghanistan's peace and reconstruction, Hua said. Back to Patel. The Biden family is set to personally benefit from China gaining access to Afghanistan's rare earth elements, and I think the timeline can serve as circumstantial evidence. On July 6th, 2021, an article was published in the AP titled, U.S. left Afghanistan airfield at night, didn't tell the new commander, from the AP. Keep the title of the article in mind. The U.S. left Afghanistan without telling the Afghan commander. Bagram, Afghanistan, from the AP. The U.S. left Afghanistan's Bagram airfield after nearly 20 years by shutting off the electricity and slipping away in the night without notifying the base's new Afghan commander, who discovered the Americans' departure more than 2 hours after they left. Afghan military officials said Afghanistan's army showed off the sprawling airbase Monday, providing a rare first glimpse of what had been the epicenter of America's war to unseat the Taliban and hunt down the al-Qaeda perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks on America. The U.S. announced Friday it had completely vacated its biggest airfield in the country in advance of a final withdrawal the Pentagon says will be completed by the end of August. We heard some rumor that the Americans had left Bagram. Finally, by 7 o'clock in the morning, we understood that it was confirmed that they had already left Bagram. General Mir Asadullah Koistani, Bagram's new commander, said. Back to Patel. So, that screenshot above points out that The U.S. announced Friday that it had completely vacated its biggest airfield in the country. The Friday they're referring to was July 2nd, 2021, just 4 days following the announcement of the deal between CATL and Tesla, which was reported on June 28th, 2021. Chinese firm CATL to supply lithium-ion batteries to Tesla. Biden claims he was handcuffed by the deal Trump made with the Taliban for leaving Afghanistan. But I'd like to offer an alternative theory. It looks more and more to me as though once again, Trump set a trap, and once again, Biden and the Democrats walked right into it. Remember, Trump said publicly that he would be leaving Afghanistan, but according to Chris Miller from this August 18th article, Trump never actually intended to fully withdraw. From defense, quote, I always felt it was a huge strategic error by expanding the war. I thought the war was for special operations, small footprint, he said at the time. By then, Miller knew that some in the U.S. intelligence community believed the war could become smaller once again and sustainable. We did plenty of war games on this, and we knew that the minimal force structure was, he said this week, the number was 800. If this all goes bad, what is the minimal force structure needed to maintain counterterrorism, strike, and reconnaissance capability? We can do it for 800, 850. Defense One was able to confirm Miller's account of the 800 personnel study independently with another former NSC staff member. Miller said he understood Trump's May 1 withdrawal deal to be a negotiating tactic. Back to Patel. How much do you think Trump knows in regards to Biden's corruption relating to China? I'm just a regular guy using publicly available information, and I've pieced together a direct connection between Biden's corruption with China and the current Afghanistan situation. Imagine what Trump and the most technologically advanced military in the world can piece together. They know absolutely everything. Remember to think bigger. Trump is always operating 10 steps ahead, and Trump knew that if Biden was president, China would put pressure on him to leave Afghanistan. It's obvious how much financial benefit was in play for both the CCP and the Biden family fortune. Unfettered access to the Afghanistan rare earth elements, one of the most lucrative markets in the world, can officially be added to the list of reasons the CCP aided Biden in stealing the election. By publicly saying he wanted all troops to withdraw and privately intending the opposite, he provided Biden with a window of opportunity, maybe better described as a security blanket of an excuse for his rapid and total withdrawal. Even Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Milley reportedly didn't want to remove all of the United States military. This is from archive.is, archived article. Quote, over 2 decades of war that spanned 4 presidents, the Pentagon had always managed to fend off the political instincts of elected leaders frustrated with the grind of Afghanistan as commanders repeatedly requested more time and more troops. Even as the number of American forces in Afghanistan steadily decreased to the 2,500 who still remained, Defense Department leaders still cobbled together a military effort that managed to protect the United States from terrorist attacks, even as it failed spectacularly to defeat the Taliban in a place that has crushed foreign occupiers for 2,000 years. The current military leadership hoped it too could convince a new president to maintain at least a modest troop presence, trying to talk Mr. Biden into keeping a residual force and setting conditions on any withdrawal. But Mr. Biden refused to be persuaded. The 2 Pentagon leaders stood before Mr. Biden near the same resolute desk where President George W. Bush reviewed plans in 2001 to send in elite special operations troops to hunt for Osama bin Laden, only to see him melt over to the border, over to Pakistan. It was the same desk where President Barack Obama decided on a surge of forces in 2009, followed by a rapid drawdown, only to discover that the Afghan military was not able to defend itself despite billions of dollars in training. It was there that President Donald J. Trump declared that all American troops were coming home, but never carried through a plan to do so. There would be no conditions put on the withdrawal. Mr. Biden told the men, cutting off the last thread, one that had worked with Mr. Trump, and that Mr. Austin and General Milley hoped could stave off a full drawdown. They were told zero meant zero. In that moment, the war, which had been debated across 4 presidents, prosecuted with thousands of commando raids, cost 2,400 American fatalities and 20,000 injured, with progress never quite being made, began its final chapter. It will be over, Mr. Biden has promised, by the 20th anniversary of the attacks that stunned the world and led to more than 13,000 airstrikes. How this last chapter of the American adventure in Afghanistan will end is a story that remains to be written, end quote. Back to Patel. Trump expected Biden to take this opportunity to betray America. And on April 18th, 2021, Trump even goaded Biden into fully withdrawing and doing it even quicker. From Axios.com, April 18th, 2021. Former President Trump said President Biden's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan is, quote, a wonderful and positive thing to do, but criticized the timeline and said the U.S. should get out earlier. Now, Biden is predictably blaming Trump for the disaster that has ensued. From Politico, quote, Biden released a statement on Saturday aiming blame at former President Donald Trump's deal with the Taliban in 2020, which promised reduced forces and a prisoner swap. Biden said the deal, quote, left the Taliban in the strongest position militarily since 2001 and left him with few choices. Follow through on the deal with a brief extension to get our forces and our allies' forces out safely, or ramp up our presence and send more American troops to fight once again in another country's civil conflict, end quote. Why hasn't Biden sent in more troops to facilitate a safer withdrawal? Why is he abandoning Americans there? The only logical explanation is that somebody is forcing him to do it this way. I'm guessing that somebody is the CCP, and I think Donald Trump and those running the devolution operation are forcing his hand. Remember the story from above, that Bagram Air Force Base was abandoned in the middle of the night without telling the Afghan commander? Why wouldn't they tell him? Bear in mind that it was Trump who signed a deal with the Taliban, and it is Biden and the political establishment who are backing the corrupt Afghan government. Article from August 16th, NPR. The fall of the U.S.-backed government in Afghanistan to the Taliban happened faster than almost anyone in Washington or Kabul could have imagined. As of Sunday afternoon, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani had fled his nation. The Taliban were on the verge of once again running the country, and President Biden authorized sending in thousands of additional troops to try and safely extract U.S. diplomatic personnel and others out of Kabul, end quote. If Joe Biden and the United States were supposedly backing the Afghan government, why didn't we tell them we were leaving Bagram? The withdrawal has allowed the Taliban to swiftly take over nearly the entire country, the same Taliban Trump made a deal with. I don't want to speculate, but I can assure you there is more to the Afghanistan story than what we're being led to believe. And believe Trump set the table for things to happen this way. Biden had the opportunity to handle things the right way, but instead, he completely botched it. While I can't tell you exactly how this is going to play out, I believe things are unfolding as Trump suspected they would. He prepared for and expected things to play out this way because Trump prepares for all possibilities. His goading of Biden alone tells me that this is how he wanted it to happen. The political establishment has come to the end of the road. Trump and the military are playing them like fiddles at every turn. The final chapter of the political establishment has culminated with Joe Biden as a fake president, red-pilling America with his every move. We are rapidly approaching the climax of this war. We are on the precipice of a new era in American history, an era inspired by the principles our founding fathers had hoped and fought and died for. In a 2020 speech, Trump said, "To grow up in America is to live in a land where anything is possible, where anyone can rise, where any dream can come true, all because of the immortal principles our nation's founders inscribed nearly 2.5 centuries ago." We are here today to declare that we will never submit to tyranny. We will reclaim our history and our country for citizens of every race, color, religion, and creed. America's founding set in motion the unstoppable chain of events that abolished slavery, secured civil rights, defeated communism and fascism, and built the most fair, equal, and prosperous nation in human history. We will save this cherished inheritance for our children, for their children, and for every generation to come. When President Trump says this, he truly means it. The best is yet to come. Patel Patriot. Follow Patel Patriot on Telegram, Patel Patriot. Subscribe at patelpatriot.substack.com. And to support this channel, if you please, paypal.me/Bitcoin Armada. Now, my voice needs to stop, but real quick, email me at pgunnels@gmail.com for questions to ask Patel. Tomorrow, we will be joined by Patel Patriot right here on this channel. Same bat time, same bat channel. We're going to have a great old time, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. Join me. It's going to be a great time. And I sure do appreciate everybody being here. 723 of you right now, which is awesome. 678 on Twitch. I really appreciate that. And as far as Odyssey is concerned, how many do we have in Odyssey? 271 in Odyssey. That's just freaking badass, guys. Okay, so a few housekeeping things. For those of you who may be new here, this stream is 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We cover a lot more than just the Devolution series. We cover the basic news of the day, the audits. We cover the debacle in Afghanistan. We cover theories as to what's really going on in this topsy-turvy world. So please be here, right here, twitch.tv/pgunnels if you can. I would really, really appreciate it. We'd love to have you as a new member of our community. We do have some of the most cutting-edge people in this audience. Also, check out Reading Epic Threads on Telegram. That's a great place to go. I don't administrate it. It's administered by Jillian. Jillian Reese Art. You've got to check her out on Odyssey. Jillian Reese Art on Odyssey. All right, so thanks everybody so much. I really look forward to your emails asking questions to Patel. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow when Patel joins us at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central on this channel to talk about all of your questions. Let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you tomorrow.
I will be the greatest president that God ever created.